Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. Before we get started, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, Consumers Credit Union. I encourage you to visit consumerscu.org to learn more about them. So, Brian, let's start today's show with what's been happening and not happening in the legislature this week.
Yeah, so every week we have a list of issues that we're concerned about moving and what's going to move and trying to just get things kind of slowed down, calm down, not make so many changes, especially to the business environment, so quickly. And we're having some success with that. This week there was an effort to try to get an energy package out of the committee, and they had been doing, I think, a nice job of engagement, discussions, negotiations. On the Senate side of the Capitol on the energy legislation, but we had some pretty big concerns about affordability and reliability. So I wanted to move toward decarbonization overall, set a rigid carbon-free goal for all electricity in the future, and we were just concerned that there really wasn't technology available to do what was required. So it was going to make potentially the reliability less and the cost more. So we've been working hard on we don't want it to move until they really deal with that, to show exactly how it's possible to reach these goals without making costs for small businesses go up. So it did end up not posting for committee this week, which we consider to be a win. That it not move before it's ready, before there's a policy that we can get behind that's implementable. The other thing that we thought was going to move this week that we're actually supportive of, but did get hung up in the House, is a proposal that's really only relevant to Detroit. It's a change in property taxes that shifts the property tax burden from improved property to unimproved or vacant property. There's a lot of vacant property and land speculators that are holding property in Detroit and not developing it. And so the mayor has really wanted to find a way to make it more expensive to just sit on property and less expensive to develop it. Making this type of tax shift, we think at least 97% of small businesses in Detroit would come out ahead on that change. However, it is a major priority of the Speaker of the House, and it does look, based on who voted yes and who voted no and who held their votes off the voting board to stop it, that the far left part of the Speaker's party, they want other things to pass. So they know this is a priority of his. He's from Detroit and has been involved in economic development and is really passionate about this issue. That there's some people in that caucus that are saying, hey, we want these other things to move and we're not going to vote for your priority. So this is kind of like a fight within the family. So there's between different factions within the Democratic caucus. And so it has, I think, probably just temporarily held up the policy. Now, word that we're hearing is that the issue that this group of folks on the left side of the political aisle are looking for is for a bill that would pass to allow for local governments to establish their own labor laws and minimum wages. That's one of their major priorities, and they're saying, hey, we won't vote for this property tax reform unless you let that bill move forward. Of course, that's a bill that we strongly oppose for obvious reasons, but just in the way that businesses operate and not within one jurisdiction, and just the idea of having a labyrinth of different labor laws across the state, up to 1,800 different jurisdictions in the state, is just not workable and something that we definitely do not want to pass. So issues, it's not unusual in the legislative process. These issues kind of get intertwined, mixed up, tied together. And so we're watching and monitoring closely, but those were the two things. I thought maybe they'd try to muscle at the energy reform bills out of committee. It appears as though they just didn't have the support to do that, which is a good thing. And then on that land value tax, it looks like there's other political issues at play that's holding it up for now.
All right. Well, thank you for that update. I want to rewind a little bit. It just dawned on me that we did not share with our viewers where we are today, Brian. So do you want to give everybody a little overview as to why we're maybe not in the office and what we're doing?
Yeah, we're actually taking a break from our Leadership Council conference on Mackinac Island. So we are at Mission Point Resort, and Mission Point Resort is, of course, owned by the Ware family. Mark Ware is on our board of directors and on the Leadership Council, just a wonderful member of SBAM, hosts us for this conference. And so we're holding that. Our fall conference traditionally is up north. It has been in a few different locations, but for several years now, right here on Mackinac Island. And it is a beautiful 50-something degree blue sky day in October on Mackinac Island. It is so perfect in terms of the weather up here, and there's just a dynamic group of small business owners spending time together. So we're just thrilled to have them here.
Absolutely. All right, let's continue on and talk about state revenues, which are coming in low. So what picture does this paint?
Yeah, this is, if you remember the state's fiscal year, it goes from October 1st to September 30th. So in looking at the fiscal year 23, the one that has just ended, it looks like the state revenues, you got federal revenues and state revenues. So the state revenues are coming in at about $30 billion. That's in the previous year it was about 32 billion. So it's about 2 billion off. And then also the Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference had predicted that the money was actually going to go up some this year to 33 billion. So not only is it a couple billion less than the previous year, it's 3 billion off estimates. So there were some policy changes that have been made in the meantime that have affected this, and income tax refunds were a big part of why the revenues came in lower. And the income tax refunds are tied to increases in deductions, exemptions, and then also credits. So you had the earned income tax credit. They went back. They made it much bigger and accelerated it, and then also, of course, retiree or senior exemptions got expanded quite a bit. Those are just a couple of examples there. But looking across the board, I mean, the state budget itself, it's a lot of things look softer in it. And I think this, as they kind of gear up for, it won't be until January or sometimes February before the governor presents the next budget. But at that time, here's what will happen. So we already have a state budget for this year. Consensus revenue estimates coming in lower, or the actual is coming in lower than the estimates. They might have to make adjustments to the current year budget, which it has been a long time since policymakers, the legislature, and the governor have had to deal with that. When I was in office, in the beginning, it was just a really tough economic time for Michigan, and so like the idea of revenue estimating coming in and actuals being lower, it's something we had to deal with on a fairly regular basis. But with all the federal dollars coming in, with inflation kind of driving up sales tax revenues and to some extent income tax revenues, there aren't that many people in office that have had to deal with a situation where it's like, oh, the budget we passed is no longer supported by the revenues coming in. And looking at these numbers, it looks like that. I mean, there's a lot of months between now and January when they'd be faced with this, but that looks it looks like a more real possibility to me right now than it has in the last 5 years.
All right, let's switch gears and talk about education. So national ACT results show that we really are starting to see the impact of the interruption that COVID had on education.
we've known that it's been that this was coming, but it's really a matter of scale and an overall impact severity that we weren't really sure about. So we've seen in like progress testing in earlier grades, we've seen reading and math scores that they did fall off quite a bit. In the most recent year, they actually kind of held steady generally in Michigan, although we lost ground relative to our peers in the last couple of years. But ACT, so this is college entrance test that is if you were to essentially pass or have a proficient score in the different areas, what that means is that when you entry-level college courses in English, math, science, those in those areas, English, math, science, and reading being the four areas that are tested in the ACT, by being proficient in this test, it says that you would get a C or better in college and early college courses. That's really what this test is trying to predict. So 1.4 million people took the ACT in terms of graduating seniors last year. 1.4 million kids took the ACT in high school, class of 2023. The average composite score from the exam was a 19.5 on a 36-point scale. And that is the lowest it's been since 1991. We really had been on or just nationally anyway, that these college entrance scores have been generally heading in the right direction since the early 90s. But the last 6 years we've seen consistent fall off. But this fall off was pretty steep. So of the 1.4 million test takers, there were 43%, almost half, 43% of those who took this test. Those students did not meet any of the subject matter benchmarks, none of them. So those four key areas that I talked about, reading, English, math, science, 43% didn't hit any of those proficiency standards. And that's a huge percentage, because here's the thing, Sarah, is that these are only that you would only take well, actually, some in some states every kid takes the ACT, but these are generally, in a lot of places, these are like the kids that are intending to go to college, not necessarily representative of the entire population. And that is so it's a big concern. This is probably the most stark example, because even though it's a 6-month trend of decline, we've seen, or 6-year, trend of decline in overall ACT scores, to go from 43% of the students not meeting the subject matter benchmarks, that was in the previous year, it was 36%. So it went from 36% to 43%. Overall, that's a big increase. Wasn't good before, but it got a lot worse, getting dangerously close to half of the students. And again, it's only the half that take the ACT.
This really underscores why we're particularly interested in the future of education. We actually had a speaker on the subject this morning at this conference, so definitely continue to keep an eye on this. So Brian, what's happening in Congress? I think they're technically still without a speaker, but are they making any progress?
Yeah, we talk about the political parties as caucuses at the state level. At the national level, the term they use is conference. So the Democrats have a conference, the Republicans have a conference, and what happens, whoever has the majority during their conference, they decide among themselves who the Speaker of the House is going to be, the one that kind of controls the agenda. And then there might be a contest there, multiple people running, but then somebody wins, and then everybody supports that person that wins. But the fracturing that's happening within the political parties, especially among Republicans right now, that is not a given. So there was a very spirited competition for who is the nominee for Republicans to be the Speaker, and Steve Scalise came out on top. but that still needs to be ratified by the entire House of Representatives. And the Democrats have an alternative. They don't have the majority, so their alternative won't win. It's just the way that the votes work. But they will be 100% unified behind their choice. Republicans will not be 100%. Well, they don't look very unified to me lately. There's been just a lot of infighting. So it is a step toward having a speaker again, a Speaker of the House. And the House of Representatives really does need to have a speaker. It's a position that the whole organization kind of revolves around. So to proper functionally, they really do need a speaker. They have a speaker pro tem, that is like a temporary speaker. But it's a position that fills in if the speaker's unavailable. But this is a pretty critical step. And while the Republican conference did select somebody, it is yet to be seen whether or not he will get support from the entire Republican conference. If he doesn't, then it will be deadlocked. It would mean that nobody would get the majority of the votes. You might recall earlier this year when Kevin McCarthy became Speaker that there were 14 failed votes before the 15th when they finally mustered the support. One of the things that made Kevin McCarthy Speaker was that he agreed to change the rules to allow for essentially a no confidence vote on the Speaker at any time. And that happened. That's why McCarthy got kicked out as Speaker, because the far right of the political spectrum called for the vote. They teamed up with the other political party, with the Democrats, to remove the Speaker. So there was bipartisan effort, I guess you could say, to remove the Speaker. But in terms of installing a new one, they did take a big step. The Republican conference took a big step toward having a nominee. Can he put together the votes to do it? I think that is very, very much yet to be seen.
All right, and as has been tradition, let's get a strike update.
Yeah, it seems like I would not have expected for us to do so many strike updates, although it's been fascinating. We have a big stake in this, the Michigan economy overall. But it just seems like week after week, there's big things to talk about. So last week, when there were no new strikes or expansions to strikes announced, there was some kind of confidence and optimism, like, oh, maybe they're getting closer and there'll be some sort of an agreement soon. And then after that, the auto workers in Canada, so there's a union that represents auto workers in Canada for Stellantis, General Motors, and Ford. That union had already settled weeks ago with Ford, and they just settled with General Motors, at least with a tentative agreement. It needs to be approved by their membership. But that has happened, and it really does change the dynamics. If the Canadian auto workers have been able to establish contracts with the exact same automakers, what's the holdup with the UAW, with the U.S. automakers? There was, though, a midweek announcement, kind of a surprise strike. There had been a tradition, but there's no reason why it had to stay this way. But there was a tradition on Fridays. The lead of the UAW would announce whether there was a new strike. They've been doing it on Fridays and saying, yes, there is, no, there's not, for General Motors, for Ford, for Stellantis, whoever. But on Wednesday, there was a surprise announcement, and this was aimed at Ford. And Ford, early in the negotiations, was the one that the union seemed to be most happy with. They expanded the strike in the others, but not against Ford. In this case, apparently something has gone awry with that progress, because not only did they call a strike on Ford, but it was with the Kentucky truck assembly plant. So it's the heavy-duty trucks and a couple of their biggest SUVs. And this plant is a major, major driver of Ford's overall profitability. So it's not just that they called a strike, and they called a strike midweek, which means that they didn't want to wait till the Friday announcement as they had been doing for the previous weeks, but they also hit Ford in a place where it hurts pretty bad. So it wasn't the F-150; those are made in Detroit, but the Rouge, but the But with the this heavy duty truck, it's one of Ford's main profit centers, and so it's a pretty aggressive move that oddly has happened in the context of the Canadian auto workers reaching agreement with the same companies, seemingly without a lot of controversy and strife.
All right, well, thanks for the update. We'll be continuing to keep our members updated on this and other issues. That is our show for today. We will be back here Monday at 3 p.m. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody. See you on Monday.